Hello everyone, and welcome to Biopedia. Today I thought we would visit a topic which has lodged itself in the popular consciousness to some extent. This is the topic of generations. Now, I will say from the outset we will not be covering the concept of actual biological generations which span roughly 30 years or so. No, instead we will be looking at the titles and terms used for various generations, or epochs if you will, among society. So today, let's go through what each of these generations would be and try to cast forward a bit when looking at the later generations and their naming tradition. Now, before we start, just a note that the years I'm going to say do somewhat vary a bit either way depending on what source you're looking at, and it's not really nailed down in concrete as a concept. So think of this as just a broad guide. First on our list is the Lost Generation. These are the people who would have fought through World War I and were born between 1883 and 1900. Next come the Greatest Generation between 1901 and 1927, or the individuals who would have fought in World War II. Third up is the Silent Generation, born between about 1928 or 1926, mid to late 1920s anyway, and 1945. Now, you might be thinking, why Silent Generation? Lost Generation makes sense because they were all lost to World War I, so to speak, and you can imagine why the term Greatest Generation stuck to those who fought in World War II. However, silent doesn't really seem to reflect anything like that. Well, apparently it comes from the fact that children born into this generation were raised to be seen, not heard, as the general cliched expression goes. So hence, Silent Generation. Next up are the Baby Boomers, who are, broadly speaking, between 1946 and 1964 or thereabouts. Again, this term has a meaning. This comes from the fact that there was a massive spike in birth rate when this generation was born. From here on in, we swap out our descriptive monikers, so to speak, for letters. The first one is Generation X, born between about 1965 and 1980. We then get Generation Y, also known as the Millennials. These children were born between about 1981 and 1996. Funnily enough, we then get to children actually born at the turn of the millennium after the millennials have already been and gone. These ones are Generation Z, or the Zoomers, and are born between 1997 and 2012. Now you might be thinking, we've had X, Y and Z, we've got to the end of the alphabet. Do we stop now we've run out of letters, or do we perhaps go back round to the start again, seeing as we started at a rather odd point of the alphabet? Well, kind of. The next generation is apparently Generation Alpha, falling between 2012 and 2025 in terms of birth years. Now, there is another generation which is currently, at least according to some people, in the process of being born. Mark McCrindle, a futurist, has defined Generation Beta as being those born between 2025 and 2039. On his website, he states that a lot of the Generation Beta children will live to see the 2100s, and they are predicted to make up 16% of the global population by the time their generation's birth years are nearly over in 2035. So, that's the generations that currently exist. This got me thinking, we seem to be following the pattern of using Greek letters now instead of letters of the alphabet to denote generations. This got me thinking, as a thought exercise, when would Generation Omega, at the other end of the Greek alphabet, start and end? To know this, we would have to know how long roughly a generation is. Breaking it down, there have been 8 complete generations between 1883 and 2025, or about 142 years between the start of the Lost Generation and the end of Generation Alpha. This gives us an average of 17.75, or let's say 18 to the nearest integer, years per generation. However, I'm not fully satisfied with this figure. Looking at the most recent 4 generations, there have been 15 years per generation every time, so let's stick with that, as it seems logical that this trend would seem set to continue. By this logic, Generation Gamma births will span the years between 2039 and 2054, and after this point is when Generation Delta will take over, and so on. Now, I'm not going to do this for the entire Greek alphabet. Instead, I will cut to the chase. There are 24 letters in the Greek alphabet. This leaves us with a total time span from Generation Alpha to Omega of 24 times 15, or 360 years. Now, we know Generation Alpha is supposed to have started in 2012. This means that Generation Omega is set to end in the year 2372. Quite extraordinary how far in the future you can move with just moving forward 1 generation or 15 years at a time. On that note, that brings us to the end of today's episode. As always, thank you all for listening. Feel free to get in touch at the show's email address for any questions, comments, or topic suggestions for future episodes. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.